Hi everyone, my name is Anam Naveed and I'm a software engineer on the PowerShell team.
And my name's Amber Erickson, and I'm also a software engineer on the PowerShell team.
And today we're going to be talking about PowerShellGet. First, we just want to say a big thank you to all our sponsors, and we're so excited to be presenting at this conference. Today, we're going to first discuss what PowerShellGet is. Then we're going to look at how to set it up and see how to map version 2 commandlets to version 3 ones for backwards compatibility. Then we're going to look at the new features we added in PowerShellGet version 3, which include reduced prompting, better error handling, repository upgrades, and much more. Finally, we'll discuss future goals for PowerShellGet and ways for you to get involved. First, let's talk about what PowerShellGet is. PowerShellGet is a package manager for PowerShell. It's a module that lets you find, install, update, and publish packages to or from a repository. Now, by default, PowerShellGet will consume packages from the PowerShell Gallery repository, which is maintained by our team, but it can easily support other repositories as well. These repositories can be local or remote. A local repository is one whose location is file share based, such as in the picture on the left, where I have a repository named testlocal, and as you can see in yellow, its URL is a path on my file system. A remote repository is one that's hosted online, such as in the picture on the right. If you're unfamiliar, PowerShellGet started off as a package provider for package management, so the two have always been inextricably linked together. You can see here that package management provides core functionality for generic packages, and it comes with a submodule called the NuGet provider, which is self-explanatory, a provider for NuGet-based packages. And PowerShellGet is essentially another package provider built on top of that. The fundamental premise was that it would act as a wrapper for package management, extending the functionality of the NuGet provider since PowerShell modules are NuGet-based packages, while also providing some more nuance specifically for handling PowerShell modules and scripts. However, the generic package provider module that package management embodied didn't really gain adoption, and package management itself is really now primarily used for PowerShellGet. And as you can see with this diagram, the flow of a PowerShell commandlet is pretty convoluted. With PowerShellGet 2.2.5 and below, a commandlet such as find module would start off in PowerShellGet, then need to go through package management, then the NuGet provider, then to some private functions in PowerShellGet, then back to the NuGet provider, and then back to the calling public function in PowerShellGet. The back and forth between NuGet provider and private PowerShellGet functions can happen a number of times. And because the two are separate repositories and one is written in PowerShell and the other in C#, it makes stepping through a debug scenario a huge headache. Not to mention, oftentimes a bug in one repository would also require an update in the other. So one of the most important high-level changes we wanted to address with the rewrite of PowerShellGet is removing package management from the equation. Another thing you'll notice here is a dependency on the NuGet or .NET executable. This dependency occurs because the NuGet provider doesn't have any published functionality. So on top of bootstrapping the NuGet provider, one of these executables needs to be bootstrapped as well. And as many people have commented on in the past, this can be a frustrating experience, especially if working with an offline machine. The goal is to deprecate a clunky and cumbersome package management and have a more streamlined and easy to maintain repository for PowerShellGet that is easier to contribute to and build out. So again, part of this means having only one repository. Another part means only using one language, C#, which allows us to have more control in terms of integration, general performance, improvement, and use of libraries. And specifically, moving to C# has allowed us to extend NuGet client APIs and gain some functionality that had previously been lacking in PowerShellGet. But you can see in this diagram that the architecture of PowerShellGet is now much more streamlined, much easier to trace, and again will be significantly easier to maintain and contribute to.
So we're just quickly going to go over how to set up PowerShellGet. And the first step for that is installing the module. And PowerShellGet does come pre-installed with PowerShell, so you do already have access to the V2 version, and that's what we'll be using today to update to the latest version. And you can check out the versions, all of the versions that have been published to the PowerShell gallery right here. You can go to PowerShellGallery.com/packages/PowerShellGet, and that will take you to the latest stable release of PowerShellGet. But I specifically wanted to highlight our latest preview release, which is 3.0.11-beta. And more likely than not, you'll have the V2 version of PowerShellGet installed unless something funky's happened and it somehow got removed. And depending on which version of PowerShell you're running, you may have a lower or a higher version of PowerShellGet. Windows PowerShell, especially earlier versions of Windows PowerShell, typically shipped with PowerShellGet 1.0. PowerShell 6 and above typically ships with PowerShellGet 2.25. And in order to figure out which version of PowerShellGet you're currently running, you can simply run get module PowerShellGet -list available, as we are doing right here. And that will just show you all of the versions that you have installed on your machine. And great, we're good to go. We've got 2.2.5. So all we need to do now is simply run install module PowerShellGet. And then we're also going to specify the allow pre-release parameter. And we're also going to specify that we want this to come from the PowerShell Gallery repository. And then we'll just throw a force on there for good measure. Okay, so now we've actually installed the module, and if we run get module again, you can see that it's right there, installed in my documents folder. And so now all we need to do is import the module. So we need to load the module into our current session, and again, by doing that, we just want to run import module PowerShellGet. And the other thing that we can do instead of importing the module is opening up a fresh session of PowerShell, and that will just by default load the latest version of PowerShellGet. And so now we're good to go. We can actually use V3, and we'll just test it out by running the get PS resource repository commandlet. And we can see that we are now able to use the V3 commandlets. And as you've probably already noticed, PowerShellGet V3 has different syntax from V2. For example, what you've just seen is the get PS resource repository commandlet. In V2, that was actually get PS repository. And so we do have a list of the full mappings from V2 to V3, and it continues on to the next slide, FYI, because there are so many V2 commandlets that got condensed into one V3 commandlet. And basically, we've condensed each type of PowerShell resource into one generic commandlet. So for example, instead of needing 5 different find commandlets, we just have one find PS resource commandlet. And through the new parameter sets, you can then filter down if that's what you're looking for. For example, if you want to run the equivalent of, say, find module carbon, you could run find PS resource carbon -type module. And again, you don't need to specify the type parameter. That's completely optional. But if you were looking for something that has more specific parity to V2, then that option is available. And so here we have the rest of the mappings. The last 4 are all the commandlets to configure repositories, and they have a one-to-one mapping, but they do have different names as previously mentioned. And so we realized the changes in commandlet names might make it a little more confusing or annoying to update to PowerShellGet V3. So we've actually created a module of proxy commandlets, and this module is called CompatPowerShellGet. So what this module does is it helps to onboard folks as easily as possible to the new V3 syntax. And this is really meant to be a proxy layer for folks who have scripts that use the old PowerShellGet commandlets. And it's something that's a bit of a temporary crutch until folks can completely move on to PowerShellGet v3. So as a warning, this is a best mapping. It's not going to be perfect and not all the v2 scenarios are covered, but for the vast majority of cases, the CompatPowerShellGet commandlets will do just fine. And I can't stress enough that this is meant to ease the transition to v3, and it's not meant to be a permanent solution. Eventually, PowerShell will only ship with PowerShellGet v3, and we didn't want to push any changes that would immediately break folks, so that's really why we created this proxy module. And of course, CompatPowerShellGet is up on the gallery, and I'm going to do a quick demo to show you how it works. First thing we need to do is actually install the module. So we're going to use our new v3 commandlet and specify that we want to pull it from the PowerShell gallery. Then we're actually going to import the module the same way that we imported PowerShellGet. We're going to import CompatPowerShellGet and just add the force in there. Okay. Now we can run get module again just to make sure that CompatPowerShellGet is available on our system. You can see here that it is. We've got version 0.0.2. Great. Good to go. I am going to do a get module on PowerShellGet as well to show you what versions we have available and to show you that we don't have a v2 version available. So we'll run that really quickly. Awesome. You can see we've only got v3 available, so we're good to go. So now if we run find module, for example, we can just use the arbitrary module carbon. This is a v2 commandlet, but we're actually using the CompatPowerShellGet proxy commandlet. And you can see that we have this error telling us, not error, a warning telling us that we should be using find PS resource, but it still works and we still get our carbon module returned. And just for good measure, we can run get command find module, and you can see that find module is actually being pulled from the CompatPowerShellGet module, not PowerShellGet. And one exciting new feature of PowerShellGet v3 is that it's able to interact with the NuGet v3 server protocol. And that's really great because we gain a bunch of performance benefits. And this doesn't affect how PowerShellGet commandlets are used, but it does allow for better efficiency and better performance. And I've highlighted a couple of quotes, the first of which is from the NuGet team itself. And they state that from our Visual Studio NuGet package restore duration, we see that v3 is about 19% faster on average than v2. The median duration is only marginally better in v3, but customers with less ideal network conditions have a much better experience on v3. And the second, from the Nexus repository manager, states that the Nexus product team testing for performance of NuGet v3 over v2 shows 25 to 50% faster build times and about a 50% reduction in the Nexus repository manager memory usage. So there's significant advantages to moving over to a protocol that's newer and more thoughtfully designed. And the PowerShell gallery isn't quite as large as the NuGet gallery. We don't have quite the amount of traffic. We don't have quite the number of packages on the site, but we are growing. We're growing significantly, and eventually we do anticipate the need to adopt the v3 protocol. One thing we've received a lot of complaints about in PowerShellGet v2 is the number of times a user gets prompted or gets interrupted with a warning. This can be an annoying and sometimes downright frustrating experience. So we've updated some of the parameters and changed some default behaviors to create a smoother, more seamless user experience. For example, in install PS resource, we've inverted the allow clobber parameters so that it's now no clobber. Clobbering meaning that a newly installed module's commandlets will take precedence over previously installed module's commandlets. And the reason why we did this is because typically users want to install a new module, even if the commandlets are the same as commandlets from a currently installed module. And so that was a small roadblock that users were often facing that they were frustrated with. And we've still allowed for users to maintain the old functionality of v2 by simply passing in the no clobber parameter. And another new thing that we have in v3 is we have a new meaning for the force parameter. So in v2, what force actually did was not quite clear, but now force will turn on all the switch parameters for that commandlet. We've tried to make it very intuitive and very clear for the user what exactly is happening when you're passing in the force parameter, and that you don't need to explicitly pass in the other parameters that force by default will turn on. So in this case, for example, install PS resource will turn on the trust repository switch. It'll turn on accept license, no clobber, and reinstall. And reinstall happens to be a brand new parameter in v3 that will install a resource even if it's already installed on the system. So this functionality, this parameter is brand new. This was not something that you could do in v2, and I, for one, am actually pretty excited about this feature. So now we're going to do a quick demo to show you how the user experience has improved and how it's become a bit more intuitive. So we're going to start off by using the v2 commandlet install module, and we're going to install the module OpenSSL. And here we get prompted. It's asking us if we trust this repository because right now it's untrusted. We do trust this repository. We want to use it. So we just say yes to all. We run that, and now we're hit with an error telling us that we need to use the allow clobber parameter because there's commands that are already installed on the machine. So we run the same thing again with allow clobber. We wait. And oops, we forgot to run the trust repository flag, so we just have to hit yes to all again. But now we can see if OpenSSL actually installed. And great, it did, wonderful. So, that was a bit of a painful experience. It wasn't too bad, but there were some hiccups there. So let's see what this experience is like in v3. Let's compare. So first thing we'll do is make sure that we actually have the v3 version installed. And you can see right there that we do. We've got 3.0.11, wonderful. And let's see, now we'll just make sure, let's clear the screen first. We will, oops, we forgot to uninstall the module. We need to do that first, uninstall OpenSSL, that is. So let's do that. And then just validate that it actually got deleted, and it did. Now we're good to go. So we can run install PS resource. And then actually, before we do that, let's import the module. Let's import PowerShellGet. So we'll just run this really quickly. And now we can use install PS resource. And we're just going to install OpenSSL, same as before. Let's see what happens. No prompts, no errors. Let's see if it actually installed. And there it is. So along with focusing on reducing prompts and creating a smoother, more intuitive experience, we really wanted to upgrade the error handling experience. We've worked on better messaging in general, especially error messaging, creating messages that are concise but still descriptive to make it easier to debug any issues or figure out exactly what went wrong. Another way we've improved error handling is by ensuring errors aren't terminating unless they absolutely need to be. And this allows the commandlet to continue processing pipeline input for as long as it can, meaning as long as those errors don't directly impact the next object in the pipeline, it'll continue to process information. So for example, if you're attempting to install multiple modules and the first module fails to install, this should not and will not prevent subsequent modules from installing. So we'll do a quick demo to show how the error handling experience has improved. So we'll start by installing a series of modules: Carbon, TSD provider, and speculation control. And for TSD provider, we'll throw in a wildcard just so that we can get an error. So we'll pass that in. And got our error there, great. Now let's see if the modules have installed. Carbon did not install. Let's see if TSD provider installed. We don't expect this to, but we'll just validate that it didn't happen. Great, it didn't happen. And let's check if speculation control installed. That did not install. So now let's see what this experience is like in V3. We're going to run the exact same thing, and we're going to hope that even though we get the error with the TSD provider, that we can still install Carbon and speculation control. So we're going to run this again. Okay, we still get our error as expected, but now let's see if Carbon has installed. Great, it did. And we'll check if TSD provider installed. Again, because it has the wildcard, we're expecting that it didn't, and it didn't. And so let's check if speculation control installed. And we're hoping that this one did. Great, that did too. So you can see that even though there is an error, we are still able to process the other objects that are passed in the pipeline, which is exactly what we want.
Another change that we've made since version 2 is regarding the PS resource repository commandlets, which let you interact with the repository store. So when you install PowerShellGet, it first automatically creates a repository store file on your machine named psresourcerepository.xml. This repository store file contains a list of your currently registered repositories and their settings. So when you register a repository, update its settings, or unregister one, it'll update the information in your repository store file. The change we made is that if this repository store file doesn't exist for a user when they run a commandlet that relies on getting repository information, or if that repository store file has been deleted or corrupted somehow, PowerShell rather, automatically creates that repository store file again and registers PS Gallery as the default repository. The nice part about this is that the user doesn't have to deal with an error message about the missing repository store file, nor do they have to create it themselves. Another major development is that in version 2, repositories were considered unique by URL, but now in version 3, they are unique by name. Also, repositories now have a priority property, so you can use this to order the repositories in the order that you would like them to be searched. A lower value means a higher priority. So for example, a repository with priority 10 is going to be searched before a repository with priority 50. If two repositories have the same priority, then PowerShellGet will search them in alphabetical order. Lastly, we've also worked to ensure that you can register repositories with a relative path, and we've added better integration for Linux paths towards this goal. So now we're going to look at a demo for the automatic creation of the repository store file. So first, I'm going to check to see if I already have the PS resource repository.xml file there, and I can do that by seeing that I have repositories registered. Now I'm going to go to the location where the repository store file is, and I can see that I have the PS resource repository.xml file there, and I'm going to check its contents. And I see that PS Gallery has been registered as the commandlet above showed us too. Now I'm going to delete this repository store file. And now in version 2, if I tried to use a commandlet that took a repository parameter, it would have caused an error saying the repository store file cannot be found. But in version 3, I can do this and I can use the repository parameter, and PowerShellGet will actually notice that the repository store file is missing and create it, and we can double check that it's been created now. So now let's take a look at a demo for the repository priority. So first I'm going to see which repositories I have registered, and I see I have PoshTest Gallery and PS Gallery registered. Now if I try to register PoshTest Gallery again with the same name as the one that's already registered and the same URL, PowerShellGet v3 is going to complain, and it's going to say that you already have a repository registered with this name. And we can verify that it's an issue of the name needing to be unique, because if I try to register it again, but now with a different name, so we'll name this PoshTest Gallery 2, we can see that it was able to do it. So you can have multiple repositories with the same URL, but the name needs to be different. Now, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to unregister PoshTest Gallery 2. So we can see that the repositories we have registered are PoshTest Gallery and PS Gallery, and they have the same priority of 50. Let's say I want the priority of PS Gallery to be higher, so I'll give it a priority value that is lower. I'm going to give it a value of 10. And if we look at the repositories registered now, PS Gallery will be listed earlier because it has a higher priority. So if I was to search for a package, let's say the package TSD provider, for example, and I don't list which repository I'd like to find it from, PowerShell Gallery is going to search for it in the ordering of priority. So PS Gallery is going to be the one searched because it had, or be the one searched first because it had a lower priority. However, if I wanted to search from a specific repository, I could just specify it. So we can search specifically from PoshTest Gallery. And even though PS Gallery had a higher priority, because we specified one, it's going to search from that repository only. Now, another change that was made with PowerShellGet v3's latest release is that commandlets now return strongly typed objects. So the PS resource commandlets are going to return PS resource info objects, which contains information about a package resource. The PS resource repository commandlets are going to return PS repository info objects, which contain information about a repository. This lets you easily see information for the object a commandlet returns, and also pipe output from one commandlet into another. Let's take a look at the strongly typed objects being returned in a demo. So first, I'm going to try to install a package named Carbon, but I want to first see that it's not already installed, and I can verify here that it's not already installed. Then I'm going to use the find PS resource command to specify the name of the package, and if it finds that package, it's going to return a PS resource info object, which then gets piped to install PS resource, and that will install it then. And this all just happens in one step, and I can verify that this was able to be installed, and I can actually pipe the output of get installed PS resource. So I can pipe that PS resource info object to FL star, and we can see all the properties like additional metadata, author, and so much more. And this just makes it really convenient for the user. Lastly, another change that we made in version 3 is that we adopted a new versioning syntax. So in version 2, if you wanted to specify a version or a version range for a package, you would use the minimum version, maximum version, required version, or all version parameters. However, these had their limitations. For example, minimum version and maximum version could be used together, but either of those could not be used with the required version. The all versions parameter could not be used with any of the other version parameters. With version 3 of PowerShellGet, we adopt NuGet versioning syntax, and you can find a link to this documentation on our slide at https://en-us/concepts/package-versioning. With this versioning syntax, basically, users can very easily specify version ranges and a specific version. So let's take a look at what this new versioning syntax looks like in a demo. So let's say I want to find, one second, we'll back it up actually. So let's say I want to find a package named Carbon, and I want to find all versions. So I'll specify the version as -version, and the value is going to be star. And this is going to give me all the versions for this package. Now, if I wanted to find a specific range of versions for the Carbon package, I would specify -version, and then I would specify the value as range 2.0 inclusive to 2.5 inclusive. And you can also have exclusive bounds on the range or mixed inclusive-exclusive bounds, and we see that it returns only the versions that fell in that range. If I wanted to find a specific version, I'm going to use the same command as before, but now the version is going to be just quotes 2.4.0.0. And this is the one that actually differs from the NuGet syntax versioning documentation, and that you don't have to use square brackets. You can just specify the version itself. And we see that it returns only the package that matched that version. Now, if I wanted to find just the latest version of this module or of this package, I can use the same command, but I don't need to specify the version value. So if the version value is null, it's going to go and just PowerShell will know to go find the latest version. And we can see that this matches up to the latest version.
We'll give you a little sneak peek at what's coming out in our next release. We're working on integrating secret management with PowerShellGet to allow for credential persistence. And this is really exciting because we've never really had a good, reliable way to persist credentials. If you're unfamiliar, secret management is an awesome new module that's meant to interact with another module called the secret store. The secret store actually takes secret management as a dependency. If you're curious about secret management, you can check out this blog post here. And I'm not going to read out the URL because it's a little long. And we're not going to go into too much detail about these modules in particular, but they're really great for managing secrets in general. So we're just super excited to finally pull in some of this functionality. And the way that it's going to work, the way that we've folded in secret management into PowerShellGet is that when you register a repository, you can now use the stored credentials parameter to pass in a hash table that contains the vault name and the secret name. And so once that's registered, anytime you use a repository, that specific repository, for example, if you're installing a module, even finding a module, the associated secret gets pulled and you don't have to explicitly pass in any credentials through the -credential parameter anymore. So that's going to create a really nice, seamless experience for those who are seeking that out. And one thing that I wanted to mention here is that credential persistence is completely optional. We're doing our best to make sure that PowerShellGet is as lightweight as possible. So something that was really important to us is that we don't take any dependencies unless we absolutely need to. So if credential persistence is something that's important to you in your workflow, you can install this module, you can use it with PowerShellGet. However, if this isn't something that you want, then don't install the module. PowerShellGet just simply won't use it, and you just won't be able to use credential persistence. And the last thing that I wanted to emphasize is that the credential parameter is completely separate and it's completely different from credential persistence. The credential parameter is essentially a one-time use of a PowerShell credential object. So you'll actually need to pass in the credential parameter, the credentials into the credential parameter every time you're trying to access the private repository. However, as previously mentioned, credential persistence bypasses this and allows credentials to be associated with a repository so that whenever you call the private repository, the credentials automatically get pulled from the secret store. And I just wanted to clarify that because there has been some confusion around that. And credential persistence is just meant to make the PowerShellGet experience smoother. It's certainly not meant to complicate anything. And like I mentioned, credential persistence is something that's currently in the works for the next release, but we'll spend a few minutes talking about what else lies ahead for PowerShellGet. And so we've recently completed a huge refactoring of the v3 repository, and we're still working on finishing up some of the parameters for some of those commandlets. And we'll have a few more releases before we hit our release candidate and then GA, hopefully by the end of the year. So please stay in touch via our GitHub page, follow us on Twitter to get some updates on that timeline. And for GA, we're really looking to have basic parity with PowerShellGet v2, fully supporting the v3 protocol endpoints, having better repository management, also better NupKeg integration, and as we've just discussed, credential persistence. But most importantly, we just want a really streamlined, intuitive experience all around. We want the commandlets to be easier and more intuitive to use, meaning you don't constantly hit errors or warnings or prompts or need to run commands a second time to include a force parameter, unless it's absolutely necessary. So for our next couple of releases after WGA, we plan to implement features such as a local cache, as well as expanding the NupKeg integration. And then even further down the road, we want to incorporate features like returning fuzzy results if resources aren't found, and integrating with other online repositories.
So with all these exciting changes we've planned for the future of PowerShellGet, we would also love to hear the community's feedback and ideas. So if you would like to contribute code or ideas to PowerShellGet, we would love that. We're going to start taking community code contributions after we GA, but in the meantime, we'd also just love to hear what works for you and what doesn't work when you use PowerShellGet. And we'd love to take that feedback and use it to improve your user experience and make things smoother for you, the user. So if you have any ideas or would like to create any issues or in the future, pull requests for code contributions, please find the address to our GitHub repository linked below. It is github.com/PowerShell/PowerShellGet, and we would really love to hear from you in the community. You can also get in touch with us directly. So we have our Twitter handles listed here, as well as our GitHub handles, and we try to be very responsive, and we really value community feedback. And we just also love to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen and view this and get to know more about PowerShellGet and what it can do for you. And we'd love to hear from you, and we thank you